My dear students, today we will briefly explain the concept of Ammensalism. Ammensalism is a type of negative population interaction. Negative population interactions are those interactions in which either one species or both the species are negatively affected. Okay? और एमेंसलिज्म को समझने के लिए आपको कंपटीशन की नॉलेज होनी चाहिए. ठीक है? And that is why I will tell you in brief the concept of competition which we have discussed in the previous class. Competition में होता क्या है? Competition is that type of interaction in which both the species are negatively affected. That means the interaction which is detrimental to both the species, that is known as competition, because these two species they compete for resources and both are negatively affected. Sometimes it has been found that this competition, this interaction is quite one-sided, where it is detrimental to one species but not to the other species, and this type of interaction is known as Ammensalism. Here you can easily understand that type of interaction where the competitive effects are quite one-sided. इसका मतलब ये है ये species B है, only species B is negatively affected, but species A is not affected at all, or if it is affected, the effect is so small that it can be considered as zero. ठीक है बेटा? And that type of interaction is known as Ammensalism. So you can say that Ammensalism is a type of competition in which the competitive effects are quite one-sided, in which only one species is negatively affected and the effect on the other species is so small that it can be considered as zero. And this type of interaction is known as Ammensalism. Okay? Here you can write down the definition of Ammensalism. Interaction that is quite one-sided, where it is detrimental to one species but not to the other, such an ecological interaction or population interaction, whatever you like to say, that is known as Ammensalism. ठीक है? Simply stated, if one population or one organism is getting a negative and another organism is getting a zero, that means it is not either benefited or it is not harmed. That type of ecological interaction or population interaction is known as Ammensalism. Okay? Or there is one more definition: any relationship between organisms of different species. याद रखना बेटा, between organisms of different species, species different होनी चाहिए, in which one organism is destroyed or inhabited while the other one remains unaffected. ठीक है? This is the other way of explaining this Ammensalism. Now the examples of Ammensalism, there are two examples of Ammensalism. One is allelopathy and second one is antibiosis. Allelopathy is observed in case of higher plants and antibiosis takes place in algae. First of all, we will discuss allelopathy. Allelopathy में क्या होता है बेटा? It involves the release of chemical substances by one species, and this chemical substance it influences the growth, survival and reproduction of other species. ठीक है? Allelopathy में कुछ chemicals बनते हैं. One plant produces a chemical and that chemical is detrimental for the growth, survival and reproduction of other species. That means this chemical negatively affects the growth, survival and reproduction of species B. Okay? This is known as allelopathy. Example is black walnut, Juglonus nigra. It is walnut tree. Okay? And this walnut tree, it secretes a chemical substance which is known as allochemical, and this allochemical is specifically named as जुगलोन. याद रखना बेटा, ब्लैक वॉलनट जिसको हम कश्मीरी में अखरोट कहते हैं, ठीक है, डुइकुल, it produces a chemical substance and this chemical substance is known as juglone. This juglone, it inhibits the growth of nearby trees, shrubs, grasses and herbs. ठीक है. This is the example of Ammensalism, because this Juglonous tree, it produces this chemical, and this chemical inhibits the growth of nearby trees, shrubs, grasses and herbs. आप देख सकते हो जो अखरोट का दरख्त होता है उसके नीचे grasses नहीं होते. It is because of this allopathy. ठीक है बेटा, it is because of allopathy. Okay, and in this interaction, the grasses, herbs and nearby trees, they are negatively affected, but the Juglonous tree, it gets nothing. Okay. And one more example of allopathy is observed in Casuariana equisetifolia, and this plant species, it produces litter, that means dead remains of this plant which fall on the ground, and this litter completely suppresses the germination of understory plants. यहाँ पे आप देख सकते हैं, a lot of litter is there. Litter means dead remains of the plants which have fallen down from this plant, and this litter, it prevents the germination of understory plants. जो बाकी plants के seeds यहाँ पे गिरे होते हैं, उन seeds की germination नहीं होती है because of this litter. It is also an example of Ammensalism. And one more example of Ammensalism is that I will tell you without showing the slide, that is antibiosis. Antibiosis is observed in case of algae. Some algal species, for example chlorella and hydrodictyon, they release some chemical substances which are known as antibiotics, and these antibiotics are detrimental for the bacterial growth. That means the algal species, for example chlorella, hydrodictyon, they secrete chemical substances which are antibiotics, and these antibiotics, they negatively affect the growth of bacteria. These are the two examples of Ammensalism. The first one is allelopathy, and the second one is antibiosis in case of lower plants, that means algae. Okay, this is all about Ammensalism. Hope you all understand this. Thank you. God bless you all.